Hello and welcome to another video in our series, How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt? My name is Mike Bombard. I'm one of the pre-sales cloud architects here at CloudBolt. And today we're going to be covering how do I create an inbound webhook in CloudBolt. So inbound webhooks are, I think they've been around for about a year and a half at this point, but they're an extremely powerful capability inside of the system that allows you to custom tailor effectively REST API enabled services. So the challenge here that we're attempting to solve is that not every IT system has a REST API included. Some of them offer things like a command line interface or some other way of interacting with the system programmatically like a software development kit, something along those lines. But the challenge is to offer those as REST enabled services. To call from other systems and solutions inside of your environment can be challenging because you need to then host your own web server, and now you're building a whole bunch of additional systems. You're increasing technical debt for the organization. So CloudBolt has this inbound webhook capability where you can expose additional REST-enabled services for the automation of all of your IT processes. So we're going to be talking, this really hones in on the flexibility of CloudBolt, where we afford the ability to create those REST-enabled services using inbound webhooks. And it also, one of the use cases is, talking with other IT systems. Another use case is going to end up being CloudBolt itself. We have a very extensive REST API for native CloudBolt objects, but in a lot of cases, there are things that you may want to tailor for your specific environment inside of CloudBolt. So that's another use case I've seen customers leverage these inbound webhooks for. The use case that we're going to be covering here is really, I have a customer that I'm working with that they have some environmental conditions that they want to trigger some action on in Splunk. So they're monitoring all of the logs across all of their systems. They see a certain environmental condition. Something hits their logs. They want to take action to remediate that condition. And they want to be able to do it by invoking an inbound webhook in CloudBolt that effectively runs a PowerShell script. They're a big PowerShell shop, so we're going to run through some steps to just showcase how we can leverage PowerShell. And we want to make, as we're building this inbound webhook, I'm going to build this in a way to make this a repeatable process so that, maybe this is more modular in nature. We don't want to keep recreating different inbound webhooks for the same capability. So we'll kind of make this a little more plug and play in nature as we go through this. So that's kind of the use case we'll be covering on the video today. So here we are in my instance of CloudBolt. We're going to go ahead and start by first creating an inbound webhook. We're going to go over to All Admin. And from All Admin, inbound webhooks show under the orchestration actions section. So I'm going to go ahead and select my inbound webhooks here. I do have a couple of things, just little minor tests that I've been working with, but we're going to start this one from scratch. I'm going to go ahead and start by creating a new inbound webhook. And I'm going to call this just run PowerShell script, just because I don't have anything more descriptive, but we're going to build this out as we go. So authentication method, let's talk about this a little bit. You can define that an inbound webhook includes an authentication. You can define what kind of authentication method we want to leverage to call this webhook. Default CloudBolt API authentication would require that the user authenticate with a user account. So as part of the REST API, they would first need to pass over and gather a token for the system from our REST API token service. Once they get the token, they can then pass that token over to invoke this PowerShell script. The other way that we will handle webhooks is with a token-based webhook, where every webhook has its own unique token, and that allows us to very quickly plug these different IT systems together. So I'm going to do token-based for this specific example. This is going to be just easy to fire. Like if we're putting a webhook action inside of Splunk, we can just call this and plug the URL in, not really have to worry about authentication. So we're going to go ahead and save. We'll see that this inbound webhook gets created. You see our run PowerShell script here. And notice there's two different methods that are generated with or functions, I guess, that are generated when we create a new plugin for an inbound webhook. One's an inbound webhook get, and this is where we define what we want to do when we run a get action against that inbound webhook. Then there's another one that defines what we want to do when we run a post action against that inbound webhook. One of the handy things here, so I can just take we can copy this. Notice the token itself is actually obfuscated so that you can't see it, but you can't copy the entire URL here. I can actually go to another tab in my browser. Customer showed me this the other day. Hit enter on that webhook and actually see the return for a get action here. We are printing out that token here just because the token's passed in as a parameter into the URL. So we see the parameters in the webhooks in CloudBolt can be passed after a question mark. We do parameter name equals and then the parameter value. So we're passing that token as part of the webhook call. The other thing we can do if we wanted to pass in an additional parameter, I can say ampersand test equals my new test. And I can hit enter, and that's going to then show here's another parameter that we're getting passed into this inbound webhook. So we can scrape the parameters that are being passed into this URL here and use that to do something inside of CloudBolt. I would highly recommend, and we'll talk through this as we get into this a little more, but you also want to validate what's being passed into this URL. We kind of want to throw away anything that we're not expecting. And if we're not getting something that's mandatory, we want to make sure that we're returning logical or easy to understand error messages as a result of that. So, so that's kind of just the basics of executing this webhook. As again, this is the get operation. We can tell it's the get because it says successfully executed the get. We'll get to the post operation here in just a little bit, but the first thing that I'm going to do, and I think this is one of the first things I've done on most of these series, I'm actually going to create I'm going to shift this over to my IDE. For developing, we do some minor syntax highlighting inside of the CloudBolt UI, but I would recommend developing either in PyCharm or VS Code if you leverage either of these solutions. So in my PyCharm instance, I'm going to go ahead. I already have a folder here for inbound webhooks. If you haven't seen my other videos, this is mapped to my ProServe directory inside of CloudBolt, which is a special directory that is protected against upgrades, so I can store stuff there on the file system and know that it's not going to get thrown away on an upgrade. I'm going to create a new webhook. We're going to call this just run PowerShell. That's going to create a new file. And again, really the big reason I'm doing this is I want to be able to edit this inside of my IDE and get some of those efficiencies that are afforded from error checking and just validation, those kinds of things. So we have our methods defined here. We have we just pulled over the out-of-the-box plugin, and we're going to start to work with it here. I'm going to save this real quick. And then the next thing that I'm going to do before I forget is to actually go. So in CloudBolt, we have what we call CloudBolt plugins or actions inside of the CloudBolt system. I can link to the plugin here, but a plugin is a reusable component inside of the CloudBolt system that can be used in different contexts. In this case, I have a plugin called Run PowerShell Script that is also being leveraged in the inbound webhook context to run that PowerShell script. This allows us to reuse this. Maybe we wanted to run a PowerShell script as a day 2 action as well. For an inbound webhook, that logic doesn't really work super well because we're using a different method. It's an inbound webhook post or get versus a run method is our insertion point for other types of CloudBolt plugins. So inbound webhook isn't necessarily translatable, but we work within the same construct. So I'm going to take a look at this plugin real quick, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to point this at my file on the file system. So this is going to be, to do that, we start with file, colon, then 2 slashes to tell it that this is a file URL, and then we're going to do another slash to start the directory chain. It's going to be var opt, CloudBolt, ProServe, and then inbound webhooks, I believe. Let's just verify. Yep, and then run underscore PowerShell.py. There we go. We're going to save, and it will error if it did not get a valid file path. It'll tell you that this is not a good file path, and you can retype it and give it another shot. But we can now see that there's a source URL set for our CloudBolt plugin. It is now pulling this information directly from the path, from the file inside on the CloudBolt appliance. So I can now go in my IDE, and I can add in, say, this is a test. I can save this file. I'm saving it on my file system. Then when I come back over to CloudBolt, if I refresh my window real quick, we should see this is a test. So that file now is the source of truth for this script. I can't actually edit this inside. It would appear to allow me to edit this here, but this is a read-only file. If I save code, it may even show it here in the UI, but if I refresh and pull it back from the database or back from the file system, it's going to clear that out. So just be aware, if there's a source URL set on a CloudBolt plugin, it's an uneditable script because we're pulling it from somewhere else. Could be on the file system. A lot of times we will use this source URL also to pull files from a Git repository. So it's another option that we'll leverage here. Let's go ahead and jump back over to our scripts. So back to our run PowerShell script. Like I'd mentioned, inbound webhook get, inbound webhook post are the two insertion points that we have for this specific use case. I'm going to, I don't know if we can define parameters as they come in or not. That would be handy though, wouldn't it? I guess this is just the default, so we can't like look for certain parameters. But we do want to make sure that we're protecting these webhooks, because if this token does get compromised or something like that, we want to make sure that customers aren't able to use this for things like nefarious purposes, I guess. So we do want to be sure that we're protecting this information. So let's start with, I don't know that we necessarily want to do a get for this particular method. Get really to me is just, we want to do a get operation to return information about something in the system. I don't think that we want to do that in this particular example. So I'm going to get rid of that, because I think really what we're trying to do is this post method where we can go out and execute that post method to run the PowerShell script that we're attempting to execute. So I'm going to go back. I'm curious now that I've saved that. We can see that that's now removed in here. I'm going to copy my URL again, and I'm going to paste and go back to the URL. Yeah, so interesting. So notice there is no inbound webhook get. So that by removing that method effectively removes the get capability from that webhook. It's going to return an error status 500 so that we know that that's just not a valid option. So exactly what I was hoping would happen. Back over to our inbound webhook post. So first thing I'm going to do here, these parameters are passed in as a dictionary object. So we have the parameters, we have the token already being passed in. The other thing that I think we may want to pass in as part of this, actually before I even get there, I'm wondering for the PowerShell script how best to do this. So there's a couple of ways we could address passing in a PowerShell script. The PowerShell script could be injected dynamically. Why don't we do that? I'm gonna give that a shot. So let's try this. This may or may not work. But we're gonna call this script, and we're gonna say that script equals. We're gonna do double curly brackets around this, and then why don't we just call it inside of the double curly brackets? We're gonna call it PowerShell script. What this is going to do is in our script, it's going to create a variable or an input parameter to the script that's going to prompt the end user to set this somewhere. And on an inbound webhook, I've never actually played with this before, but what I'm hoping to do is to be able to define this as a code field, and then I can just paste my script in there. That way, again, I can reuse the same webhook for multiple different PowerShell scripts. So script equals these double curly brackets. I was talking to a customer about this earlier today. The scripts that we set in CloudBolt, they're really not the scripts that we're going to execute themselves. The entire thing is a template. It's a Django template that we can render at the time of execution to pass in all of the information that we need to gather to make this script execute. So I'm going to prompt the user to pass in a PowerShell script. I'm actually going to set this to a global variable, just because it's kind of outside of our methods and things like that. And then I'm going to use this script variable once it's been passed in to actually, you know what I'm going to do here? I'm going to do triple quotes, because what I suspect may happen is if our PowerShell scripts end up having single quotes inside of them, this is not, I don't know how this escapes inside of here. So I want to be sure that this is a string, and it could be a single line PowerShell script. It could be 100 lines. We just want to be sure that we're not forcefully causing errors here. So one of the things I would be cautious of if you're using this mechanism, do not use triple quoted comments in PowerShell scripts. I don't even think this is a valid block comment for PowerShell, but I could be wrong. Yeah, so don't use these inside of a PowerShell script for comment sections if you're going to use this method to do those things. But this should be fairly safe. Yeah, so that's going to go ahead. I'm going to save here, and I like to check these as I go through the process. I'm going to go back over to my plugin. I'm actually going to refresh my webhooks page as well. So plugin, notice we're now being prompted for a PowerShell script. I'm also going to change the type of how we're capturing this information from the end user. So I'm going to click on PowerShell script. Actually, I clicked the wrong thing. If I hit edit here, I can change the type. I can change this to a code type. And when we do code, what's really handy is this gives us the ability to paste something in with a kind of lightweight editor so that we can kind of see the formatting a little bit. It kind of looks like this. These are Ajax editors that we're showing to the end user. But now what I should see is if I go to edit here, that doesn't show here. So I'm wondering how we can set variables for inbound webhooks, or if that's a possibility in the system. If not, we'll take a different route. Typically, like with orchestration actions, we can set a default here for an input. We do see the input here. Why don't I just refresh one more time just to be sure that doesn't kick something in. Yeah, so it's not showing my variable. So maybe that's something that I can report as an additional feature capability, because it will be handy to be able to drive these a little more dynamically. So let's take a little bit of a different approach here then. So we're not going to be able to do that. But what we can do is we can create a kind of a wrapper script that we can then use to pass our script in here. So I'm going to do def PowerShell script. I am going to pass parameters in here. And I'm wondering how we can interact with these. So this will be interesting to see. First, I may check my parameters to make sure that they're parameters I'm looking for. But second, I want to pass them into this PowerShell script to generate the PowerShell script. And I'm going to do that here. I'm going to start this with a triple block quote. And I'm going to knock this down, and I'm going to take it back to the beginning of the line. The reason I do this is more it's more, you don't necessarily have to do this. What it's going to do is it's going to indent everything. Actually, you know what? Since we're doing PowerShell, that doesn't really matter. I usually do this when doing Python just because Python is very indent sensitive. But PowerShell, doesn't really care about that. Usually you're opening and closing parentheses to do those things. So now that we have PowerShell script here, I'm just going to do something very, very simple for now. But this is going to be my sample PowerShell script. Maybe we just do a couple of lines. Since this is a comment, I'm not super concerned about the length here. I mean, we have some of these are overrunning. I'll fix the Python code here, but for the PowerShell script portion, I don't really care if it goes beyond like the 80-line recommendation for PEP8. And then I want to do write console. The parameters passed in were let's see. How can we use We're going to need to inject parameters in here somewhere. Can we do an F string? So you can't do an F string with a triple line comment, which is what I was hoping for. Actually, here's what we do. Let's do script equals, and we'll start an F string here, and what we'll do is we'll do the first line of the script. I'm going to set parameters and convert from JSON. So now what this is going to do, I believe what this will do is it'll give me a JSON object, because parameters it's a dictionary entry. It should pass in actually before I parse into parameters, I'm not going to put curly brackets around that because the parameters are going to be in JSON format already. So that was the right thing. Sorry, we do want curly brackets because that's the F string formatting. So that lets me pass that directly into the string. This is exactly what we want to do. We'll do script equals and we'll do script plus equals. And what we can do now is, now that we've set as a first line of our script, we're going to pass in all of our parameters. Now we should be able to consume those parameters inside of the script. Let's see how this works. I think this should, and once we call this function, we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and do PowerShell script parameters. The other thing I'm going to want to do is convert this to a JSON string just to be sure that it's formatted correctly. So I'm going to import JSON, and then I can do, just right inside of here, I can do JSON.dumps and dump the parameters to a JSON string as we call the PowerShell script. So there's my script. And then the next thing I want to do, actually the one thing that I did need to do is we will need to specify a PowerShell host. So we need this script to run from a specific server inside of our environment. Again, I can't pass in variables in the existing iteration, so I am going to set this as a global variable. If you were to take this sample and put it into your environment, you could just do this as, you can just set it in your environment, but I need to know my server ID that I want to run this against. So I'm going to put a comment there. There we go. Okay, we're going to go over to what was I doing again? Let's see. PowerShell script. I need to get the server ID for my PowerShell host. So in my instance, I have a PowerShell server set up. So MD PowerShell 01. And I can see this is ID 23416. I'm just going to copy that server ID. I'm going to save it inside of my script. Now, anytime we do this, we're going to execute against that server. So the next thing I need to do is I need to get my server. Server.objects.get. We're now talking to the Django relational model. I'm going to import my infrastructure.models.server. I'm going to pass in that server ID. So now we should have a server object. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and, it's not run script. Why don't we do this? Let's use shell plus and start an SSH session to my CloudBolt server. I'm going to load into shell plus, which I've aliased to cb-sp. But that's just running opt/opt/cloudbolt/manage.py and then space shell_plus. But now we're launched into our interactive database model. I'm going to do server equals server.objects.get ID equals, paste our number. We should have our server, MB PowerShell 01. There we go. So now we can do server, and then I think we have method here called execute script. So execute script is really handy. And one of the prerequisites for execute script to work is I need to, on my server, I first need to ensure that I have credentials set for this server. And that tells CloudBolt how we're going to authenticate with the guest operating system. So I do have credentials set here. So as long as those are set, this will automatically take those credentials. And notice when I use Shell Plus, I'm hovered over execute script and it shows me the inputs required for this. Really handy. But I'm going to do execute script. I'm not going to do script path. I'm going to do script contents. I believe is what I want. We'll give that a shot. You can use any of these additional inputs. Remove after run, I'm going to leave as true. We definitely want that. We don't want to leave the script on the guest. But I'm going to do script contents equals. And then, actually, why don't we do this? I'm just going to, this isn't going to work. This is going to fail. It's an expected failure. I'm going to take my PowerShell script here. And I'm just going to validate everything that I've written so far. So there's my PowerShell script. There's my function to create the PowerShell script. But I now need to create parameters. So why don't we say params equals test1, and then value 1, and then maybe we put in a second value of test2, value 2. Then let's do, oh, syntax gets you every time. There we go. So params equals that. So we should see a params dictionary now. There's our dictionary. So now what we can do is we can dump that to JSON. So import JSON. We already did in our script. Then I'm just going to start copying and pasting what I have here. So let's do, oh, because I called it params. Of course, that's what happens when you take shortcuts. So let's see. Do we see our script? No, we do not. I did not return my script. That would be helpful. Have to return what you're doing inside of the function to get it usable outside of the function. There we go. Let's try and set our script again. Did an error. There we go. So here's our script. This is what we're gonna use. Notice convert from JSON. This should, again, this is a JSON string, and I'm just trying to. It's passing those as these should be safe strings, so as we write these, that should be all right. Yeah, but you can see that they're passed as the first line of the script. So that should be good. I think we're good to go. That's another reason I like doing the triple lines is I don't have to worry about putting new line characters after every one of my lines. Doing the triple line script automatically includes that. Notice it did also capture the white space here, so the 4 spaces before each line. It shows it here, but it doesn't really matter. PowerShell doesn't care. Other languages might. So you can also back this up to the left-hand side because it's inside of a script block. Python will still continue to function even though this function will still work even though it's not properly indented. It's strange the way that it works sometimes, but anyway, there's our script. So we now have our script. Do we have our server? We have our server, so we're going to do server dot. Actually, I have it all here. I already put it in. No. There we go. Script contents equals script. Let's give it a shot. See what happens. Okay, so it's running a command on the server. So we're making decent progress already. Command return standard out. Oh, it's not write console. If you've watched other videos that I've done, I struggle with this every single time. You think I'd remember that this is write output. Anyway, let's reset our scripts. There we go. We see that it's the right output now, and then we can go back up to our execute script line. We can execute script. Now I just want to see that the right output is echoing the parameters from the guest itself is really what I'm looking for. I don't know what they're going to look like or what they're formatted as. There we go. Perfect. So we see test 1, test 2, value 1, value 2. So we see that this is now a variable inside of the guest for PowerShell, where we're passing those values from the rest, or the inbound webhook here. We're passing those into the script. So I think really we're really close to getting this to function. We need to include our execute script line here. I don't know if we're returning a result or not, but I'm going to try and save this as a result and see if there's anything I can do. Just a second to execute. See. Okay, parameters passed in. So yeah, it looks like no, I was looking for the output. So result. That's interesting. Huh. I have no idea. Oh, that's the actual output. Okay, so that's something that could be useful. Maybe we want to do something with that. I'm going to save result. I'm not going to do any. Actually, you know what? Why don't we return the result? So you'll notice here as part of the return, I'm going to format this a little better. I don't like the way this looks. This is not super easy to read. Okay, so this is... Okay, so it looks like we're returning a tuple from this, and I'm not entirely sure. Why don't we look at the docs and see what the docs say about this? But if we go over to docs.cloudbolt.io, Cloud Management Platform, search up Inbound Webhooks. There it is, Inbound Webhooks. Okay, let's see. Say anything about the returns. So this is handy. I don't think I realized this, but we talked about permissions on inbound webhooks earlier. But if you want to restrict them to be only executable by specific users, groups, or users, you can add that required code to your inbound webhook, and then you can return a permission denied error if that user is not authorized. So allowing granular permissions to be written into the plugins themselves, I don't think. Message. Example return list, JSON parameters passed in. I'm going to do some of this testing in Postman. Just actually, it should be fine to do. Maybe even just in Shell Plus should be okay. With curl. Sample inbound webhook. The code below for a sample inbound webhook called get CloudBolt stats. So it looks like it's just returning that object. I think this just returns, it is an array. It's a really bad example, but yeah, so it looks like you can return anything you want. So message, we can say that it successfully executed the PowerShell script. Oh, remember, this is read-only, so I need to go back to my IDE. Here's my message. I don't need to do any of this. I don't want to pass back parameters, but what I do want to pass back is my result. So now we can pass back our results so that you can parse that data if you want to. So returning your PowerShell, and when you're working with PowerShell and CloudBolt, I would recommend using the right output mechanism because that will pass the data back as part of what we're doing here in CloudBolt. So we're going to return a message and a result as part of our post mechanism. Let's go ahead and I'm not doing really any error handling in here. I think this is going to be fairly straightforward. The other thing I did want to do is before I get to this, I want to do parameters.delete. I believe it's token, right? So I do want to get rid of my token from the parameters. I don't want to print out my token. Nobody else needs to know the token. I don't want to pass that to PowerShell because it's specific to CloudBolt. So I'm removing the token input, or the token parameter that's passed into my inbound webhook post. I'm deleting it from the parameters dictionary. Then when I get to the next step and I'm passing the parameters in, actually, you know what? I'm going to shift this up a line because I want to prevent I don't want to log the token to the parameter, so I want to protect that. So I'm going to, first thing I do here, I'm going to remove the token from the parameter set. We don't necessarily need, as long as we have that token, we can execute the webhook. So at this point, we've already done what we need to do with it. From here, we can go ahead and move on down the line. Let's save this. So we have our server. We're going to run our script. This should do the trick. Now the key is to go over to, we need to pass in, again, this is fairly simplistic, and I would do some more error checking when we get there, but we're going to pass in some different parameters to our URL. Actually, let's just do this in Shell Plus. So in Shell Plus, we're going to use CloudBolt to call CloudBolt. I'm going to import requests. I'm going to do requests.posts. And then with posts, you see there's a couple of things we can pass in. Number one is the URL. I'm not passing any data to this post because all of my data is going to be compartmentalized in my URL. So really, we're just going to do a request.post and pass over the data. But we need to build our URL, which to do that, I need to go back to my inbound webhooks. Here it is. Oh, that's the docs. Just go back here. We'll capture that initial with the token included, part of the URL. We'll go back over to my session here, and we're going to store URL equals, and then we're going to build this out. And I'm going to do, like I said, additional parameters can be added into an inbound webhook by simply doing an ampersand and then passing in more parameters. Let's go ahead. Now, you may need to, if you have spaces and things like that in what you're passing in. Let's do this. So this is the base URL. The other thing we're going to do is maybe want to encode additional parameters. So one of the ways that we can do that, and this is before you pass this over, is you may want to go through and do, let's do the rest of it equals, I'm going to just start a string here. We're going to call this, I'm just going to start it with an ampersand because that's what we're going to start. We want to postfix this here. We're going to do ampersand. We're going to do, let's do myvar equals, I'm going to do quotes here. And my variable, I'm going to end quote there, and then I'm going to do another input. And I'm going to call this maybe hostname. And then I'll do hostname equals so we could be passing anything into this. This is just an example. But I'm going to do this, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to from URL lib3, I need to do URL lib3 dot what am I looking for? Encode. It's actually ends up being parse quote. And then I'm going to pass in my URL underscore string and see what that gives me. So URL encoding, if you start doing spaces and things like that, you need to swap this out with lib3. What am I doing? Lib3. There's no parse. There's no quote. Hang on for just a second. Okay, so apparently, after a quick search, the Google sphere URL lib, not URL lib3 is the one that I want, but parse.quote. So we're going to go, and then we're going to pass in the string that we're passing in, so URL string, see what it looks like. So notice this encoded probably a little more than I wanted because I still need the ampersands. I need my equals. I want that to show, but I want everything that's not the ampersand equals to be expanded. I believe. I could be incorrect there. Let's do, because you can also do safe equals, I think this is an array. Actually, I think it's a comma separated string. I could be wrong. Ampersand and equals. So notice now we have our ampersand and our equals, but it is going to fix all the rest of those. Again, I may not want the. I am by no means an expert at these things. So this is going to be. I'm going to save that for now. URL underscore string, and we're going to see what happens. So my URL should equal f, and then we're going to do URL, URL underscore string should give me URL. Nope, that didn't work. I forgot. And tick. There's my URL. So it's going to start here. It's then going to go into the ampersands and kind of translate all of that so that it's readable by the system. So now we have our URL. The last thing we need to do is a request.post. We can pass that URL over. Let's see what happens. Connection pool does not like that. No, certificate verify failed. So I'm also going to pass in because I don't have real certificates on here. Verify, I believe, equals false. Response equals 500, so that's not helpful. So we're gonna capture that response. Response equals response dot content, and that's going to show us the error. Dictionary object has no attribute delete. Okay. So it made it inside of the method here, which is handy. Let's do. I could have sworn. I think I still have a test dictionary. Nope. Params is what I call it. So params dot delete. Maybe not. I thought there was a delete. Oh, you know what it is? I think it ends up being delete params test1. Now, param shouldn't have test1 in there. Yeah, there it is. So that's just syntactical issues. There we go. That should delete the token out of the parameter stack. Let's go ahead and give it another shot. Do response equals response. Response.content. Message token. So the token, maybe we need to keep the token in that parameter stack for it to work. I'm going to probably create a new stack for everything except for the token. I don't want to pass the token into the script. I don't really see a reason to do that. I don't see any other mention of token in here. Now the other thing we could do is we could also, so one of the things with CloudBolt, we can do a tail-f. We're going to go var log CloudBolt application.log and see what the application log is showing as the error. So here's our post. We can see the error. So internal server error, status code 500. See, I'm assuming this is another error above it. So this is a little better. Line 23, key error on token. So I don't, maybe it's not called token. Let's shift this down a little bit. Actually, let's remove that for now. We're gonna print this into the log. I want to see what that looks like because I don't remember what that's called. Maybe it's web token. Let's go ahead and go back to let's see. Okay, so I need to import relib, import requests. I also need to create my URL equals my initial URL, then I need my URL string. So I have my URL string now. Now I need to, let's do the, I'm going to call it full URL. Actually, I'm going to take the old, rename that variable. It's just typing everything out. And then I can do requests, actually response. And I'm just hitting the up arrow to get back to the last ones that I did. But instead of URL here, I want to do full URL. Verify false. That's better. Didn't error on me. So I suspect that this is now running the PowerShell script. We should see in the job logs that this executed, we should be getting this information. So the parameters, so I can capture the token ID from the parameters file. But let's see what the response is. Response.content. So we got a 200. That's what we're looking for. Parameters passed in were nothing. So that's super fantastic, right? Let's do this. So I'm suspecting that my full URL was wrong. Just think through this. Actually, I want to see my parameters first before I go down that road. So I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to open a new SSH session that allows me to keep a log tail going. Should be in here somewhere. There we go. So we're just going to keep this tail going, but we should see this message will show up. It looks like maybe the tail started just after that started. So let's go ahead and knock that down a few lines. We're going to rerun that script. So import URL equals string equals. Instead of URL string, let's do enc string. That way we can keep our variables. Actually, let's do this first. That's now stored as our encoded string. And then we can do full URL equals our URL plus our encoded string. So now we have our full URL, and then we want to do response equals. We should be able to jump over here and actually watch the logs come through here. So you can see we should see. A little too far, I think. Oh, this message will show up in CloudBolt's application log. So it's not actually getting any parameters. So that's where the problem is. I think that I need to encode that entire string. So let's go ahead and give this another shot. Actually, it is token. So I see token right here. So that's exactly what we're looking for. But I think because I've messed up this string, I think that that's going to give us a challenge there. I'm just not entirely sure how we want this formatted. I'm going to pause this for a second, test it, and then fix it, and we'll come back and wrap this up. Okay, so did a little bit of research and realized that I was doing this incorrectly the entire time. For a post method, just as you would expect with a REST API, you don't have to pass parameters into the URL itself. So the reason that parameters kept ending up blank is because when we're doing a post method, we're gathering data from the call where there's a dictionary of JSON input that's passed into the request method. So just walk you through how I set this up. Remember, let's go back through and set up our, this is my variable, cblabsales.net. Let's set these two. Just copy these so we can use the same thing, but let's create a new dictionary called data. We're going to wrap it here, and we're going to paste that information in here. I already have cblabsales.net. I'm going to put a colon there. I'm just going to back up and do this all a little backwards. But really what I'm doing is creating a dictionary entry here. So what we should have when we're done is a dictionary that specifies key value pairs of my variable. This is my variable, host name, my host name. Then what we can do is we can go into our requests model. We'll pass in the URL, which is now just the URL is only, actually let's print that just to show you what we're working with. But our URL is only the URL with the token included in the path. So there's our URL. We have our data. We're going to go back up to our response. We're going to pass that data into the JSON parameter for my request.post method. Again, not verify certificates. The other thing, and I don't know if this is an issue or not, but I think I did have to specify content type as a header. Because we're passing in data, I need the system to understand that this is a JSON payload that we're passing in. So we're going to go ahead, hit enter. We can pop over to our running tail. We can see, look, we now have my variable. This is my variable, host name. Here's my host name. So we can see here that this is what we're seeing. And then if we go back over, we should see our response now. Well, first of all, it's a 200. So then our response.content is, there we go. So it's going to show the parameters are passed in were my variable. And this is kind of formatted funky because just the way that it's printing inside of PowerShell itself, it kind of shows a columns for each variable and entry. But it's printing out my variable, and then if you go into the column, the value is this is my variable, and then host name. You go into the column, it's mbcb01 cblabsales.net. So again, this is not the PowerShell script that we would use, but what I would do in a production environment is I can use this as a reusable wrapper script where I can then come in, first of all, every time I redo this, make sure I'm using the correct server ID. I can then go down and I can paste my entire PowerShell script here. And in my PowerShell script, I should be able to go through, let's do this. Let's do one last thing. So I want to write output. So we're going to write all of our parameters, but then I'm going to write output just to show how we're using data here. I'm going to do write output. let's say my variable, and then I'm going to paste in parameters, and it's not my variable, it's going to be my underscore variable, or my var, I think is what we ended up calling it. Yep, my var. So that should print out the variable there, and then we'll do another one that ends up being the second one, where instead of my var, we're going to do hostname. So this is how we would reference those variables inside of our PowerShell script. We know that we have parameters here because we've set them as the first line in our script. So when we get into the script, we can first set it, and that gives us an object in a JSON-based object in PowerShell where we should be able to reference key value pairs. Let's save that real quick. I'm going to go ahead and resubmit my request. I don't need to change anything because the script inside of CloudBolt should already be updated. Let's just validate that that is the case. Let's refresh this real quick. And there we go. We see our updated script that's in the system now. We can go back over and resubmit our inbound webhook call. Give it a second. Make sure that we're seeing the correct response in our log. Content. Let's see. My variable, colon, at my var, this is my variable. Not quite what I was hoping to see. And I think that has to do with PowerShell. So I'm just going to test this real quick. Let's do $string equals, actually I'm going to do ticks around the dictionary object, but let's do, actually I can copy this exactly how we have it here. Do print. At least I can copy most of it. But let's paste this exactly how we have it. I need to influence this a little bit because JSON doesn't like single ticks. Somehow exited there already, but there we go. This should be a string. So let's just echo that. There's my string. Now I should be able to do that. I don't know what this creates, but let's call it the convert from JSON. So let's call it parameters. JSON. And then str. There's parameters.my underscore var. Should translate out like that. I'm wondering if it's the string. You can do a right output should do the job too. PowerShell go. Hopefully I didn't just close that because let's see it here. Oh, there it is, the console. Okay, so that's weird. I think we need to do something along the lines of nope, it's still including the entire thing. Okay, and after much consternation, that apparently I thought I'd done this before, but maybe not. So it's just right host and outside of the parameters because we're referencing that property on there. We need to do that. So hopefully one last test here. We're just going to go ahead and step this outside of the quotes, and this should give us the values for each of those individually, just kind of showing how to reference us. I'm not by any means a PowerShell expert. And hopefully this draws things to a conclusion. Okay, successfully executed. This is my variable. All right. My variable, this is my variable. Okay, so it did it. It put some... I did my variable for both of them, but then we see our host name. I'm not entirely sure why it's putting a new line between those two. I'm not super concerned about it either because that's a PowerShell nuance. But, you know, at the end of the day, we're printing information here, and that's what it's showing. So we see that we're able to pass those into the script. We see that we're able to print those variables. Again, the big idea here is this whole script block, you can take this wrapper script and copy it multiple times. Again, I think if we work towards getting this to where we can variabilize these things, it would make it more reusable across the CloudBolt platform. So I'll see if I can work with product to get that functioning. But in the short term, we can take this script, copy it, and then place a new PowerShell script in here. And we're up and running pretty quickly with a PowerShell script that can then pull parameters from our parameters. So the other thing that I would point out is you probably want to put some logic in here, and you could do it in PowerShell as well, but you want to make sure that we're not getting parameters we aren't expecting, and throw some kind of error handling out there for things that we are expecting. Might be a worthwhile exercise as well, where you could do, you could reference parameter, you could do like a parameters dot get, and we will put in my var. We could give it a default value, but I don't want to do that. I want to do, and I don't recall. So params dot get test1. So I can get test1, but what about test3, which doesn't exist? It doesn't throw an error. I was kind of hoping for an error. What I could do is I could do a params test3, because this is going to throw an error because that key is not defined. So we'll get a key error if we're referencing an undefined key. If we want to make sure that my var and the other reference exists here, I can very quickly put this inside of a try catch loop. And then I can accept on a key error, which is, this is what we want to do if we get a key error. I'm not going to return, I don't even know. Yeah, so I am getting the message and result. I wanted to check on that. But we've defined exactly what we're returning to, which is really handy. The other thing that I do want to do here, though, is with this key error, I want to do must provide a value for my var. So putting some logic around how we want to parse these parameters and leverage them. So maybe my var needs, maybe it's a host name, and we want to make sure that host name meets a certain convention. The other thing we could do is after we make sure that it exists, maybe we could check it to see that it matches a regex expression. So just a lot of flexibility that's available here, a lot of things to think through. This is a really powerful feature. Again, I would highly recommend in a production environment, make sure that you have error handling here to capture and validate that the parameters you're expecting exist there, and that they're not able to use this for nefarious purposes. So since we're very explicit on the script here, if we're taking action against a specific virtual machine, you may want to take in virtual machine name and a couple of other identifying information and validate those 3 or 4 things against the object so that we know that we're getting the object in question. So hopefully this was a helpful video. Again, the big value behind Inbound Webhooks is that we can extend the product to offer really anything as a REST-enabled service, because we can pass it into a REST API using a CloudBolt plugin. And in this case, it was a REST-enabled service to run a PowerShell script. Again, the customer that we're talking through had a request. They want to be able to invoke a PowerShell script from Splunk, and this would give them a real quick and easy way to, say, pass in some parameters they can then leverage inside of their PowerShell script. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions on the video, please let us know. Reach out to your account team. We'd be happy to dive deeper if needed. So thanks a lot. Again, my name is Mike Bombard. Thanks for sticking around.